So how did you get into the industry?
Me, personally, I started as a trainee reporter at the age of 16. So I left school at 15 and I ended up on a youth training scheme, which they have versions of that now, not quite the same, but I went on work experience at my local newspaper down in Cornwall, and they took me on as a trainee and I did an apprenticeship. So apprenticeships were a thing back then they kind of seemed to dwindle away, and now they're a thing again. So I did an apprenticeship back then, that was in 1995, so 23 years ago, and that's how I got into journalism.
Where did you start and how did you progress to where you are now?
Well, I started on a very small weekly newspaper called the Cornish and Devon Post, which was my local paper. They had 4 editions, and one of the editions was the Holsworthy Post, and that's where I lived. So it was a dream come true for me to work as a reporter on my local newspaper. So I trained there for 5 years, and when I was 20, I moved to my next newspaper, which was the North Devon Journal, in Barnstaple in Devon. Then I went to the Express and Echo in Exeter. Then I went to the Derby Telegraph. Then I went to the Western Gazette in Somerset, and I've been there ever since. That was 10 years ago, and my role has changed on numerous occasions since then. So I was at the Western Gazette initially as the head of content, then I became the editor, then I became the editor of Somerset Live as well. Then I dropped the editorship of the newspaper, and now I'm the editor of Somerset Live and Bath Live.
Very good. So what do you find most challenging about the industry?
The most challenging thing about the industry now is the transferring, the transfer from print to digital. So we know that more people are accessing news and information online. The difficulty that we have is that we've still got people in our business who are used to writing for newspapers, and that kind of content isn't necessarily what people want to access online. So the most challenging thing for us is to find the right content that people will read online, and to make it eye-catching, and to entice people in to read it, to spend time on the site, not just dip in and dip out. And that's really tough, because a lot of stories that we think people want to read, actually they don't want to read. And a lot of stories we think people who don't care about that, they do. So it's a completely different audience, and that's the biggest challenge.
Okay. So how do you motivate yourself when the going gets tough, and how do you get through a mental block?
God, that's a good question. Well, I think like meetings like today, we try to have a laugh and make it light and fun, because there are times when you have to be serious, and we have to perform, and we're judged on how many people read our stories, and you could see the figures there for how many people are coming to the site. But I like to try to keep it fun, try to make the working environment a really nice place, somewhere where you can have a bit of a laugh, because it does, it makes for a nicer working environment and an easier working day. It's not always like that, but that's what I try to do.
Good. So what advice would you give to anyone aspiring to go into the industry?
In terms of going into digital publishing now, today, the advice I would give to people is that they really need to think about what people want to access online. So we get a lot of trainees who come in and they're pitching story ideas, but they wouldn't read those stories themselves. So I think, well, why are you pitching them? Why do you think other people want to read them if you don't want to read them? I think a lot of people think still that we should be writing about quite heavy-duty, worthy subjects, but online, which is what we do, people don't want to read that online. They want to read things that are funny and entertaining, and people need to really think about the content that they would be producing if they come into the industry now, because a lot of the time people, it's not for them, it's not what they want to do as a journalist. So that is the advice I would give. Really look at what online news providers are doing, how they're presenting their stories, and learn from that, because that will better prepare you for coming into a digital newsroom now.